Well, hey guys, welcome to the debate. I have guest Bryan Jarrell, IUL expert. And so today we're going to be debating whether or not IUL is a good retirement vehicle. And I think, we're not debating whether IUL is a good product or not. It just really, is it a good use for retirement, right? And does it make sense from that standpoint? And so I think what you're going to find out is Bryan and I both see a big like pandemic in the industry, and we have different viewpoints, but we also have a lot of similar views. And so I do want Bryan to share kind of what he sees too in the industry, because I think like there's no moderator for this debate, so we are going to have our differences of opinions, and we're going to have a lot of similar opinions. But I think the real winner is whoever watches this video is going to get a lot of information that you otherwise wouldn't get, right? And it's going to allow you to make a different decision based on, okay, now I know this and I know this. What decisions about IUL for retirement should I make? And so, but yeah, Bryan, why don't you start with just sharing kind of what you see in the industry? I think we have very similar viewpoints that there's issues.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge advocate of the policies themselves. I know them inside and out. Probably the only people that know them better than me are the people that taught me. I have an extreme passion. I go through spreadsheets and build spreadsheets and play with them, and I'm a huge, huge, huge fan. But the number one thing that I see wrong is, as much as I love the product, I hate it as well. So earlier when I said, can you love something and hate it at the same time, or can you be for it and against it at the same time, is the fact that, I've been doing this for 3 years. I've done over my niche is doing policy audits. So I find people that have these policies already in force, and I solicit to them. So I've done over 400 plus policy audits, and out of those 400 plus, I've come across 12. It's 12 done right. So 97% of the policies out there are what I do refer to as, the prime Americans like to call it, trash value life insurance. And I can understand why the product gets such a bad rep when it's so misrepresented.
Yeah. Can you explain the 97%, what you're seeing, maybe how they're designed?
Yeah. So theoretically, I guess all the way up to 2020, it used to be, actually, can I share my whiteboard?
Absolutely. You should have permission.
Okay. Let me pull it up real quick. And this is one of the biggest issues with IUL and why I hate it. Absolutely hate the product. I wish we had more regulations. I wish people had to be better certified, but this is the number one thing that happens. So all the way up to 2020, it used to be, and this works for whole life as well, it used to be that if you had $10, you were allowed to put $7 towards the cash, but at least $3 had to remain towards the cost of insurance. If you followed these guidelines by the 7702 guidelines, then it was still an insurance contract and it was tax-free. Well, lo and behold, in 2021, they changed the 7702 tax code, and they made it now to where in 2021, you're allowed to take 10 bucks and you can put $9 towards the cash. And now you only need $1 towards cost of insurance. So for those who have been in the industry since 2021, you guys will see a big difference between the death benefit required to what it is now versus what it was before. So the problem is now you're able to earn $9 instead of $7 on that same cash. But we as agents took a big hit. We went from earning $3 in commissions down to $1. So I think what's happening is a lot of these companies didn't want to lose that money. So what they're doing is they're going out there and saying, hey, you got 10 bucks? Perfect. Mr. Smith, you need life insurance. By the way, this is an amazing tax-free vehicle that's going to set you up for retirement. Then they turn around, they structure it for $5 of cash growth and $5 towards cost of insurance. Well, in a product where your cost of insurance rises as you get older, you got to make sure that you're earning enough money to be able to overcompensate for the rising cost of insurance and stuff. So because of this, again, out of 400 plus policy audits I've come across, 12 have been done correctly. Not 12%, 12. So 97% of the policies out there are what I refer to as trash value life insurance. If you'd like, Michael, I do have a sample. We can go through it and, explain like the difference between a properly funded and properly structured, or if you want to keep it on a certain topic, let me know.
Yeah. So I think it would be good for us to go over the basics, because I think that's going to be part of our argument for anybody watching. If you if I can share my screen as well. Let's see.
Uh,
Make sure I do this right.
hey, another whiteboard fan. I love it.
Absolutely. So I think it's important, most people don't understand what's going on in the policies. If you hear some of the explanations, they don't know what the structures are or how they work. And I want to go over this real quick. The main thing is you're investing your money into the policy, right? And so what happens is your dollars are going into the general fund, right? Now, the general fund gets, say, 4%. I know everything's on the rise right now, but let's say it got 4%. So if you had $10,000, then that's a $400 credit, right? And now that's what's going to be invested into, people keep coming in. That's what's going to be invested into the option strategy, right? So what they're going to do is they're going to go buy options with this $400. And so if the options earn, you're going to capture those earnings, right? And then that's going to be ran through different filters like cap rates, par rates, things like that. Now, if the market goes down, then the options are worthless because all it is it's a contract that says, hey, you have to sell me this index at this price for the next year. And so if the market's down, why would you exercise those options when you can get it cheaper, right? So they're only valuable if the market goes up. That's how you protect your money. So if you lose the 400, you still have the 10,000. So when they say there's no market risk, that's what they're doing with your money, right? You still have the 10,000. Now, as Bryan mentioned, it's not the only issue. One thing I will say is when there's cost, right? So you can lose money in an IUL. In fact, anytime the market is zero, you're guaranteed to lose money in an IUL because you're not covering that cost, right? But that's how that works. And then there's two options. And I know Bryan we kind of disagree on this a little bit, but we're on the same page. So you have level options, or this is the contract itself. You have level and you have increasing, right? So this, the death benefit is equal to the cash value plus the face value or the net amount at risk, right? So in a level policy, if you have a $300,000 death benefit, when you first get the policy, your first premium, you're going to have a little bit of cash value, but let's just say you had zero, which means you have 300K in insurance. But as your cash value increases, your death benefit stays level. So to complete the formula, what has to happen? Your net amount of risk has to go down, right? You're paying for less insurance. Now, this is important because when you get to retirement, and this is going to be part of the basis of our conversation, is you want to reduce this net amount at risk to as little as possible, right? In an increasing policy, you start off the same exact way.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic because increasing death benefit is really a level death benefit. You're keeping the same net risk the whole time, whereas the level death benefit is truly a decreasing. So it's kind of weird the way they play the words.
And if you've been on any of my trainings, that's exactly the case. And I actually use that same terminology. I say it should be called level and decreasing. The problem is those aren't very good marketing terms, right? Yeah. Nobody wants a decreasing policy. So, but yeah, this works exactly as Bryan was saying, right? This stays level, which means it increases in cost every year because the cost of insurance goes up. And then your death benefit is increasing, right? Now, when you get to 65, you can level this off. You can reduce reduce the net amount of risk. But how often do you see, Bryan, that this isn't the case? They're just leaving it increasing and
all the time.
all the time.
Again, 97% of the time, they're either structured wrong or they just don't understand that risk. Majority of the policies that come across are structured on an increasing death benefit that is written at target funding.
Right, right. And the reason this is so important to understand is because if I just have a sample cost per thousand on your insurance. So you can see in this policy, this is a 59-year-old, 27 cents per thousand per month, right? By the time she gets to 80, it could increase, well, 81 could increase more than 10 times to 2.98, right? And I'll let you explain that, Bryan. Also, if you want to share loans, because I know you have a particular type of loan that you prefer.
Yeah, I definitely prefer an index/variable loan. It's the best way to get those arbitrage like returns. I can see the fixed rate being used maybe after the first 10 years, but being used in the first 10 years just doesn't make sense to me because it's not really a zero wash loan. Majority of carriers are going to have in the first 10 years. It's I'll actually show you guys a contract. Let's pull up a. Let's see, 100K sample. So let me share my screen. Anybody that's selling any product, by the way, I don't care if you guys are whole life, term, whatever, every single person should read an illustration from page to page, and you should also read a contract from page to page so you can get all the language. But if we go up here, and this is what I talk about the fixed loan, why I really don't care for them, is because it's not truly, if you look here during policies 1 through 10, you're earning 3%, yet you're paying 3.9. That means you're admitting defeat on 0.9% every single year for the first 10 years. Now, after 10 years, it does truly become a zero wash loan. You're earning 3%, and then hopefully the current is 3%. Nationwide has been pretty good at keeping these steady. They do have, the levers in there, though. They can drop it down to 1%. So you can get that negative arbitrage even on a zero wash loan. So important stuff to understand. But for the most part, again, check the history on the company, and that'll kind of put you a little bit better at peace of mind. So the reason I don't like these is because it runs into what's referred to as a triple ledger system. I'm going to share my whiteboard so you guys can better understand this. In most loans, when we have a variable loan or an index loan or whatever the other 18 million other names they have, what happens is if you guys have 100 grand and you pull out 50, what happens is you got two ledgers. Your 100,000 is still compounding at whatever interest rate you have, while your loan is being paid at whatever interest rate it is. So in other words, if you pull the 50 grand out, you're still earning on the full 100,000. Now, that's how the variable loan works. Very simple. Where the fixed loans get a little complicated is they use a triple ledger system. So now if you got 100,000 and you pull 50,000 out, now that 50 goes into a sub account. So now you got a triple ledger. Now that 100,000 actually gets deducted the 50 grand. So you're no longer compounding on the full 100. You're only compounding on 50,000. So if the market does 10% that year, you're going to get credited 5 grand. However, your 50,000 over here is earning at 3% while you're paying 3.9, at least for the first 10 years. So what's going to happen is you're now paying or earning 1,500. Wow, let me pull up the calculator because I'm not that good at math. That 50,000 is going to compound against you at 0.039. So 1950. So really what you're doing is you're losing $450 on a loan, and you lost opportunity costs on your full amount of money over here. Now, the nice part is if over here we do have a negative year, and I know this is where Michael's going to go. So if we have a negative year, you earn nothing. So therefore, next year, you have $100,000 left, yet your loan compounds against you. So you're going to pay $2,500 in interest. Therefore, now your loan is $52,500. So now instead of you having $50,000 of cash value, you have $47,500. So you actually lost $2,500. Now, the argument is what happens if you get way down the road in a policy and all of a sudden you have 3 negative years in a row? Well, what about all those other positive years you had as well? For example, if we follow the cycle, we traditionally have 7 years up 3 years down. So the whole hope is that those 7 years are going to offset those 3 negative years. So the very next year, in the 4th year after we have those 3 negative years, like 2000, 2001, 2002, you're going to start that recovery process where now if the market gains 10%, we gain 100 grand, yet our loan still compounds against us. So now we've got 52,500 times 1.05. So now that loan, that 50, even though we only pulled out 50,000, you owe them 55,125. You've paid $5,125 in interest. Yet over here, this compounded to 110 because we earned 10% that year. So you start doing the math, you're going to see that you're back positive to 54. What would that be? 875. So again, yes, there are going to be negative years, and yes, it does suck with a variable loan. You are injecting a lot of risk into it. However, again, as long as we're earning 6% on average and we're borrowing at 5% on average, you're going to have a good day. There's not a single point where the S&P is not averaged at least 6% over a 30-year period, 40-year period, 50-year period. You can use a lot of large numbers and go back as far as you want, and you're going to find that S&P, as long as you have anywhere between an 8 to 12% cap, you should average more than 6%. Sorry, off on a tangent, but I know that's where we're looping to.
You're good. So I think we have the basics down, right? Like how the policy works, and then this is where we kind of differ, right? We both see the same problem. I know you, and I give you kudos, Bryan. I truly respect this, that you do I know you take a big hit on your commission to put as much money as you can for that client's future. But I think where we disagree is, okay, this is what's going on, and we kind of take different approaches to it, right? So given the risk kind of, and you mentioned the risk that you inject into the policy, and obviously when it's an insurance policy, when people are using it for death benefit and they're not leveraging it very highly, then you're not going to inject a whole lot of risk, right? It's probably going to be just fine. But what happens when, what's your argument for using it as income, or even a primary source of income during retirement, not just like a supplement, right? Because I think what's going to happen is you get too highly leveraged and you start to inject a lot of risk into this thing, and you put yourself in a very leveraged situation.
Yeah, that's why it comes down to setting a precedent with the client. I'm not going to go out there and tell them, hey, you can pull 12% of income per year. We're going to keep it low. If you got, let's go back to the whiteboard. If you got 100 grand, what I recommend is anywhere between 6 to 8%. So if you got 100 grand, and again, we got a dual system here, guys. You got 100 grand compounding at whatever rate it is, you're going to have that 6 to 8%. We'll say 7 just to keep it smack dab in the middle. You're pulling out $7,000 of income. What happens is this number is compounding and this number is compounding. So the next year we won't have 7,000 because of, again, the 5% loan. It would be 77,350 plus the additional 7,000. So now what happens is in year 2, you have a loan of 14,350. But while this is compounding against you, this is compounding for you. So I'm not afraid of that happening as long as the client's not installing too much risk by over leveraging. It's the same concept as if you were to take a massive loan. Guys, if you guys had 100,000 and you pull 100 grand out, we've got nothing left, right? If this happens, you got to pay 5% to borrow that money. If you earn nothing, you're going to get nothing. You're going to have to pay $5,000. Very important. If you do not make this interest-only payment, you will lapse your policy. In other words, no more death benefit, no more cash value. You got nothing. And now any money you put in over the policy, you're going to get taxed on. So how do we prevent this? Simple. Just don't over leverage. If you don't take out more than 80%, what happens is you're going to pull out 80 grand. You're left with 20. Now, because we borrowed less money, you've got 4,000. Sorry, my pin's catching up. You got $4,000 of interest. Now, if you don't make that 4,000, you still got that $20,000 left in your wallet sitting there. So that allows you to be able to withstand 4 negative years in a row without having to come out of pocket whatsoever. So if they subtract that 4, that means we still have $16,000 sitting in that account waiting for that upturn. It's going to happen. Again, the worst we've ever had was during the Great Depression. We had 4 negative years. It's happened one time. There's been 2 periods where we had a 3-year negative run. So as long as you're not over leveraging, whether again it's income based, taking a decent substantial amount like 6 to 8% versus taking 12% or taking 100% versus 80%. The key point is you can control that risk by not over leveraging.
Got it. Now, one thing I want to talk about is the I'm going to go on the offensive here a little bit. So, the illustrations, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a few things I want to share. I think a lot of people get really hyped up on the performance on uncapped indexes, and I think actually we're in agreement here, Bryan. But I pulled this is from Advisors Excel, and this is an index performance sheet, right? All these proprietary indexes, well, a lot of them are in here, and as you can see, if we go back, here's my issue with these indexes, and I know sometimes you get a better par rate, right? But you can start to see a pattern if you look at the last 10 years, and I shared some of this information on the group. National Life Group, for example, the US pay setter, I know has performed negative since inception, right? Yet they're going to illustrate 11%. So I think a lot of the thing that you got to watch out for is like the disappointment.
To be fair with the pay setter, that product did just recently come out within the last 2 years. And in an increasing rate environment, those low volatility indexes are not going to perform well. So by saying it hasn't performed for the lifetime of the policy is a little bit of a stretch, just because it hasn't had those, it hasn't been in a good environment. So again, that can be adjusted by having a good advisor as well, because I don't have my clients going into the low volatility indexes right now, because again, traditionally they don't do well in an increasing rate environment.
Right. And that's what I wanted to make a point here. You start to see 3s, 4s, 1s. Here's an 8%. And kind of like what you said, Bryan, there's no actual history behind it. So I think a lot of times agents, what they do is they basically create a spreadsheet with an illustration, and they tell their client, like, look at this number.
I can see exactly what they do. Let me share screen again. This is literally how it goes, because I hate this part just as much as you. Like I said, I hate it at the same time.
Let me finish here real quick. Like I want everybody to see this, because if you guys whether you guys decide to sell IUL after this or not, or you guys kind of alter how you do it, I think it's important that you guys see actual performance. The Dow Jones, 8%, 1896. Outside of this, there's a Barclays right here that has more than 5 years. But outside of that, if you eliminate all the indexes with at least 5 years or less than 5 years, you're outside of that Barclays, you're not going to find one that has performed at even 6%, right? Yeah. Here's one, 6%, 2022. So the only ones that do perform are the big three. You guys know their names. So Dow Jones, NASDAQ, and of course the S&P, right? The other thing with a lot of these proprietary indexes is they tell you they're uncapped, but there's embedded fees. For example, Nationwide has a 2.6% fee embedded into the Mosaic, right? And the Zebra Edge. And so these are things that your clients don't realize that are in there. And so I wanted to share this. I'm going to let you go ahead and rebuttal this, Bryan, but I think we can both agree at the end of the day, like, it's the S&P that's going to perform.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement with that to a certain point. It depends on what's happening in the economy, because if interest rates are leveling out and they're doing well, those VCIs are going to do good. And just to kind of educate everybody on how a volatility control index actually works, is everything's built on a risk to reward measure. So if we take a pendulum and we draw this out, these low volatility indexes, you have low risk, low reward, high risk, high reward. Low risk, low reward are going to be cash, bonds, etc. You're not going to go crazy, get super rich on them, but they're conservative, safe. Over here, we have equities. Sorry, my handwriting's horrible because I was trying to not run into the camera. So what these volatility control indexes do is they target a 5% volatility buffer, and it changes every single day, guys. These target these every day. So if there's one particular stock, like let's say, I don't know, Tesla goes up and down constantly. We're always seeing it up, down, up, down, up, down. They're going to pull from Tesla and go put it in. They're going to sell their Tesla and go buy somewhere else. They want to control about a 5%. Well, when volatility is extremely high, like right now, the market's up and down, up and down, up and down. Where do you guys think they're putting their money right now? Into cash and bonds. They're not targeting equities. So right now they're not doing so hot. So if you look at any of the other ones that did perform while we're in a steady interest rate environment, the VCIs were doing fairly decent. You know, we have actual statements with people in the VCIs that were getting 20% in a single year. So it can happen. It's just you got to understand the environment and where you're at.
Right.
But that's how low volatility indexes work. So that way, at least you guys are aware. What pisses me off is people don't understand them, and they're selling them. They're going to an illustration, and they're doing this. They're saying, "Hey, Mr. John, look at this. 14.28% is what this bad boy's been doing." But it's on a 30-year historical average. Yet, as they say that, they never talk about the fine print. Let's read this, guys. What does this say? The BNP Paribas Global Age Factor established when? 4/8/22. Performance shown on a back-tested by applying the index strategy to historical financial data. Well, I'm telling you guys right now, if we're back testing, you should have bought Amazon, you should have bought Google. Stay away from AOL because they don't do very well. So
it's easy. It's easy when you know the winners, right?
I compete against other IUL agents all the time, and I've had it where the client's like, "Oh, you're only earning 7% over there in the S&P. Come over here with me with Securion and look at this Prism 3 index. We're going to get you 14.28." It's like, they're not going to get you 14.28. I'll tell you what, if you come back in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or even 5 years and show me that you're averaging 14.28, I'll give you $1,000. It's not going to happen. So that's kind of where, you know, again, you guys are going to hear me say it over and over and over. I love the product, but I hate the product. With the regulations that are out there, it's an absolute joke. Anybody with an insurance license can go sell these things. And the problem is the uplines are not teaching it. If you guys even go to, you know, and I'm not going to throw any companies under the bus, but there's a couple 3-letter companies that have an advanced market that is supposed to do these things, and they're not even doing them right. So if their advanced marketing ain't doing it right, that means they're teaching their downlines not to do it right, and their downlines are not doing it right either. So when it comes down to it, again, I hate IUL, Michael. I do.
Yeah. Isn't it funny that some companies call their teams simple retirement solutions, and it's anything but?
Yeah, definitely not. Definitely, you really got to understand the product and how it works to be able to sell it at a higher level. It sucks.
Right.
And it's not. Again, 97% policies are trash. And this is how they're selling it. That's shame on these insurance companies too, to be able to give the tool to be able to do this. To be able to show an average historical rate of return on a 14.28, yet I guarantee you, if you look at Michael's screen, this is going to show probably a negative return over the next 2 years, and probably for the last 2 years, and probably the next 2 years, just being honest. Because interest rates have been so finicky that volatility has been high, it's just they're not going to perform. But I have the ability to go over here and tell my client that I've averaged 18.85, so they should go with an IUL because I'm going to get them that.
Dude, it's even worse with FIAs. Yeah. There's no regulation. I mean, some of those are illustrating 30%, which is insane.
I've seen it. The SILAC ones have been, I'm just like waiting for the SILAC ones to blow up on people.
Yeah, for sure, dude. But yeah, that's back to my point is there's no actual history, right? It was what, 2022 on the bottom in the fine print. Yeah. So I'll tell you a story. I actually was sitting with a client, $600,000. I showed him a North American annuity, certain index, and he goes, and this is what prompted me to start asking questions. Yeah, I was one of those IUL agents. I was started at WFG, right? And so I was really pumped and sold on this and the indexes and look at these illustrations. I was selling it, unfortunately, the way a lot of people were selling it. And so I was sitting with this client and he started asking me questions. And he said, well, when was this index created? And I told him, I don't know. I'll find out for you. But here's the 20-year history. How embarrassing do you think it was when the next day, because I did find out, I had to tell him, well, it's a year old. Obviously, I lost that client. I lost all the credibility showing him a fake index, or not a fake index, but just a fake history, I should say, right? A back-tested history. but that's what really started like pushing me down this road. Okay, what are the actual performances? And I think when you look at these index strategies, the volatility ones, they're there so that the insurance companies can control the cost, right? They can control the cost of the options. And the reality is, they don't perform as well as the S&P. Tony Robbins wrote a book, Money Master the Game, and he's talking about mutual funds in this book, but it's the same thing. He said the mutual fund companies do the exact same thing, and guess what? They don't outperform the S&P. Only 4%. 4 out of 100 will beat the S&P in a 10-year stretch, and the next year they won't. In the next 10 years they won't. And so I think it's really important when you're even thinking of selling products like this that you need to know this stuff, right? This is why I 100% agree with Bryan. There needs to be more certifications or regulation, requirements for you to be able to sell stuff like this, because it is anything but simple. But that being said, with the S&P, you always have a cap, right? And the cap rates are subject to change. They can go up, they can go down. The reality is it's a lever that the insurance company can pull. And if you look at the guarantees, I'm going to actually, and I hope what you guys are getting to is these illustrations are just projections. They're supposed to show you how the policy works, but they're a lot of BS.
I agree.
Right. I think if you're selling an annuity with an illustration, you're selling it wrong. You're saying, look at the number. You should be selling it on concept. Like a financial advisor showing a portfolio of stocks or indexes, they're not allowed to project. They can show you the history and you can make an educated guess going forward. And I think it should be the same way here, right? But I'm going to share a illustration, and granted, it's I designed it to lapse on purpose. So, but to illustrate a point, right? So I'm going to use National Life Group. I know this is somebody in one of the groups said this is the number one selling IUL, right? And so I think some of the levers you got to be aware of here are, well, there's quite a few, right? But the cap rates, the par rates. Let's see what page. So currently, the U.S. Pacesetter, I just kind of hit on that one. The Barclays one hasn't really performed for F&G. I'm not saying you can't have big years. I think even an index that, even if it were to go negative over the course of 30 years, there would still be volatility in that index. You would still have positive credits. So I'm not saying, hey, look at the guarantee, it's going to run out. But if you look at the participation rates, or even if you look at the S&P option right here, you have a 9.25% cap, and the guaranteed is 3.1%, right? And so one of my arguments against, like, why would you put yourself in a position where you give the insurance company the power to drop your cap rate to 3.1? And I'm not saying they would, but they could, right? If there's something that happened in the economy, if another virus went around and there's a lot of deaths, they could change this, right? They hold that power on any anniversary date. So that 9.25 is only guaranteed for 1 year, right? The one thing we know is it will not perform as illustrated. There's going to be changes within the policy. Same thing with the par rates. They give you the 225% to entice you into this index where they can control the cost. I've even seen some policies where they will actually give you extra compensation to put people in these indexes. But they can drop it to 50%, right? And when you understand the low volatility, they're not really designed to perform. They're designed to just control volatility, control costs. And so I think that's the biggest issue. So when this one is $1,000 a month, $12,000. Now, Bryan, like I said, obviously I took a little more income than I should have, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's to illustrate a point, guys. You get to, let's say, age 70 right here. Remember, your compounding is still growing, right? And here's another thing too. If this policy were to lapse before age 75, and it's different for different companies. I know Nationwide's 65, but this one's 75. If it were to lapse before 75, you would have to pay the difference. So there's 1.2 million here, and there's 300,000 that you've put into this policy. So this policy has grown close to $1 million, right? That would become taxable income. If you guys don't know that, right? You hear a lot of agents say tax-free. It can be tax-free done, if you land the plane, but if you mess up before 75, it's not tax-free. You are going to pay income tax.
And it is important to understand too, guys, that $1 million that you pulled out, if you look there at the ledger at age 40 or age 74, year 40, most people think, oh, I'm only going to get taxed on $1 million minus 300,000, so I'm gonna get taxed on 700,000. That's not the case. You get taxed on all the interest that went to the insurance company too. It does become a $1.628 million taxation minus 300,000 means you're on the hook for $1.3 million. So it is important. Again, this kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier of making sure that you're not over leveraging. You should take no more than 68% in income in retirement to kind of prevent this from happening. Because what's happening is you're causing that loan to go up so quick that you're not giving your compounded growth time to basically accumulate. The other problem I have with these illustrations, and it could be good or bad, I guess it just depends on if you're bearish or bullish in the market, is these illustrations are AG 49 compliant, which means they're only giving a 0.5% of spread as well. So if the market, in all those years where you got 9.25, they're showing as if you only got 5.5 because the loan rate is 5. So it can only show a 0.5 base point of arbitrage, where historically it's been a little bit higher than what the 0.5% shows too. So I would love to see this extrapolated and ran against, actual market volatility and seeing how it actually fluctuated in the 0 years as well as the years that performed at 9.25.
Right. I think the problem is it's hard to do so, right? Like and it's hard to predict the future just because the market
Absolutely.
perform, right? But what the issue is too is it does show positive arbitrage every single year. So it doesn't let you know, like, okay, well, what if I do get a 0? Right. And so your balance here is 187, right? If I were to go to where are we at here?
The sad part is 7% of the people are probably going to fall into this trap because their agents don't know any better, and they're illustrating that you could take out max loans, and it sucks.
Sure, if I passed it, that was probably it.
You looking for the cost summary?
Yeah.
That's it right there.
Yep. Okay. So let's go to age 70 where we were. So we look at the cost summary. We got 2,500 in policy charges, and then you're banking on a $73,000 interest credit, right? Now, if you kind of took less income, it would take longer to get to this point, but you would eventually get there because this is going to compound against you at 5%, right? So what happens if this doesn't come in? Let's see. Your current surrender value is 238,000. So here's the deal. If you missed that credit, $73,335 plus the policy charges, $2,581, and you divided that by the 238. Oops, I did that wrong.
I mean, just being frank, a lot of this stuff is easily fixed with not over leveraging, though, Michael. You're talking about a fee that's compounded out over 33 years. I mean, we all know the difference between 1% and 2%.
Right. But what I'm saying too is you're going to have some other negative years. You're going to have some losses along the way, and you're going to get here sooner than you think. Right. This in particular is a 31% loss, right? How many of those could you take in a row?
If you're not over leveraging 2, 3, 4 with no problem and catch it back on the recovery. If the market's historical returns are 7 up and 3 down, it's going to go positive.
The problem here is, Bryan, the further you go along, look, you're just accumulating more and more, right? And so people aren't going to have the income that they think they're going to have. And if you look at it from a cost standpoint,
show them $70,000 of income, you're over leveraging it. So you're right. They're not going to have the income that they thought they had because it's overly done. I would never show that.
Right. Like I said, I admit I designed this to lapse on purpose to make a point, right? Now, every illustration is going to get to this point because every illustration you run it and it's going down every year. And that's with positive arbitrage, right? And that doesn't count. There's no negative years in that illustration, but you're taking a 31% hit here. And, you know, how are you supposed to make that up with a 10% cap or a 12% cap? Like it's not possible, right? So the cap's the trap, right? And that's really the issue. And I think when you look at it from a long-term standpoint, you know, my two biggest arguments are this: you have lack of control, right? The insurance company controls all levers. They can change the par rates on you. They can change the caps. They can change the cost of insurance, right? They can
but the
even
cost
change your
of
loan
insurance
rates.
is so minuscule. Like anybody that understands net risk, the cost of insurance, they can double the cost of insurance. And they can't even do that contractually, by the way. If you guys actually look at a contract, you look at current insurance versus max insurance, it's usually only an increase. They only have a lever to pull at about 25% increase. So if you're paying $100 a year, you might go up to 125. If you're paying 1,000, you might go up to 1,250. It's not nowhere near as much as a lot of the whole life guys make it seem like it's going to 100x over time and stuff like that. It's such a minute thing. And then also, if you understand net risk, as that corridor drops, that increase of cost of insurance is one of the lowest fees of the actual policy. So, you know, the fact that if you want to get technical, the biggest downside is they have that lever on the caps. That's the biggest scary part, because if those caps drop down to 6%, you're not going to be averaging 5% to maintain with the loan. So that's where the risks and levers come in if we're going to get technical on it. However, it's an easy issue. You just 1035 out into a newer company. You know, if I was to ask you, would you give up 10% to compound at 4%? It's basic math. How many people are going to say no? Everyone's going to say, yeah, sure, I would love to give up 10% to compound at 4. So if I can take somebody from a company that did not have good cap integrity, they dropped the caps down to 6%, and I can take them to a company like Nationwide or Pacific Life that has had really good cap integrity over their lifespan. We 1035 that over there. I now get them from a 10% cap back to a 12% cap. Then guess what? All the fees that we're going to be setting and stuff are going to be offset. So it's not a big deal. It's just you got to understand, if they can pull levers, so can we. We have just as much leverage as the insurance companies with the 1035. If every single policyholder goes to a company and 1035's out, what happens to that company? They're going to have to start fixing their problems. It's literally capitalism.
Yeah, and if you
we don't have enough agents that know this, so we're never going to be able to punish them, and they know that. They know that 1% of the agents, 2% of the agents, 3% of the agents are going to be able to pull these levers to basically reality check them. So really what we need to do is educate more people and start banding together, because there are companies, you know, F&G has had a phenomenal track record on their passive program, and I love them for that. But I've audited some older policies that are from like 2004 where their cap rates are literally 6%, 7%. How are you ever going to average the 5% loan rate if your cap is 6 or 7? That means in those 3 negative years, you got 0, 0, 0. Even if it's followed by all 7s, you're still going to be averaging right around just below the 5% mark. And then you got cost of insurance and fees and stuff. So, you know, you really got to make sure whatever you're doing, you're averaging more than what you're paying. That's the bottom line.
And the problem is, Bryan, is that's not just F&G. I have stats on Securian. The new policies caps are at 10%. The policies between 2020 and 2023 are at 8%. And if it's 2006 to 2019, the cap is at 7%. So that's another lever.
I don't have a problem with that, because the numbers say why that is. What I have a problem with, so let me share my screen real quick.
Okay.
So the way these companies, Whole Life, IUL, all these companies, what they do is they use bonds to get these funds. So let's say that we have a bond, and Alex, I think you're in here. Thank you for this because you're the one who taught me this. The way bonds work is if we got a $10,000 bond and that coupon rate is 5%, well, we're going to be earning $500 every single year until that bond matures. Let's say it's a 10-year bond. In 10 years, what happens is they hand the $10,000 back, plus you accrued the $500 for 10 years, so that's $5,000, right? Now, this is how these companies were purchasing them. All of a sudden, interest rates go up, and now coupon rates are 10%. So now, anybody that has a coupon rate on today's policies, they're now getting $1,000 per year. So at the end of their 10-year period, they're going to get their 10 grand back plus an additional 10 grand. So these insurance companies bought a lot of these bonds during our low interest rate environment. So therefore, I understand why their caps are a little bit lower. The downside to whole life is they don't have, whole life has to play all in one single pool because it's all dividend rates. They don't have different blocks of money like IUL has. So all these new policies, because they have higher coupon rates, they're able to afford a 12% cap. But all those old policies can only afford an 8% cap. So as long as I know the math behind it, I'm not mad because all that money went into old bonds. It's no different than an annuity. Somebody has an older annuity, they're getting a 6% cap, a 7% cap, et cetera, yet the new ones are getting 9, 10, 11. Why is it? It's because newer money is making more money. So what I do want to see happen, though, is as these older policies, the 2016 policies, once those bonds mature and they get their money back up here, I want them to come over here and reinvest and now keep cap integrity and now raise the caps on those older ones. So if I see in 5 to 7 years that they have not increased those caps, I'm going to red flag that particular company and say, hey, man, they're robbing Peter to pay Paul. And that's what I don't like in a company. So it's important to find the cap integrity. But I've always said that if the levers are pulled and I understand why they're pulled, I'm not mad. If my cap rate on my personal policy right now is 12%, if it went down to 10% because we went back into a low interest rate environment and loans were 2% on a mortgage, I'm okay with it because that means they're earning less money, so they can't pay as much money. But what I don't want to see happen is all of a sudden interest rates go up, they go from a 12 to a 10. This tells me that they're robbing Peter to pay Paul. I don't like that. So it is very important to do your homework on whatever company you're going with and understand how all this stuff fluctuates on that.
Yeah. So how do you feel about that, Bryan? Like Securian, F&G, the way they're tiered that way instead of
F&G, I don't like because a lot of those bonds matured and started to get a little bit higher rate, yet they're still paying them out at an extremely low rate. So they're robbing Peter to pay Paul. Securian is too new of a company. Their product hasn't been out that long. So I honestly believe that Securian has fallen under that gauge where, they're just got old money earning at 5% instead of 10, and they're trying to break up the pool rather than, if you got one big pool and we inject a bunch of heat into the pool, it takes a long time for that pool to warm up, right? But if we take the warm water and put it into a smaller pool with only new members to our hotel, they're going to be happy. So it's easier to heat a smaller pool than what it is a bigger pool. And that's the difference in why the IULs have a little bit more leverage than whole lives is because, again, they can split the pools. Do I think it's right? No. From what I heard is they can afford a 16% cap right now. So honestly, instead of giving people 16%, I think what they're doing is they're subsidizing. So these companies that the older policies that can only get to 8%, they're subsidizing the 2 and they're saying, hey, let's meet in the middle and let's give them a 12% cap or a 10% cap. So you got to look at, are they good to their old clients or are they going to be really good to the new clients only? And then if they are good to the new clients only, I want to see that the old clients are being taken care of once those bonds do mature.
Yeah, I encourage you, anyone watching, check out Bobby Samuelson. He explains what it costs to have a 10% cap. I know right now it's like 5.4%. Yep. So these insurance companies are their interest rates are starting to rise, right? So you might see those caps go up, but regardless, I think you're talking about a company that is incentivized, and you can see it through the illustrations, but they're incentivized to market and make things look better than it actually is. And so I'm not surprised that the current cap is 10%, but the older policies, for example, are 7%. And like I said, this isn't just one company, right? You got to look into your companies. And to me, that's a big issue because if you're at 7% cap, I don't know how you expect to keep up with a 5% loan. right?
Well, just
It's just not
1035
going to
out.
happen.
Get with a newer program. If I can take you from a 7% cap to a 12% cap, I'll guarantee you over a 20-year span, that's going to add an extra about 3% on your average. Would
And
you give
Bryan,
up?
if you're constantly having to change companies, is that going to cost you a load?
Oh, of course, you're going to have to pay the premium load, and then you're also going to have to pay the per 1,000 expense. Me personally, for my clients, if it's an existing client and I got paid on their first policy, I'm going to go through and I'm going to add the max term commission, non-commissionable term rider I can to alleviate the per 1,000 fees. But again, it's basic math. If we pull up a calculator, you guys keep hearing me refer this out, but if you had 100 grand, would you give up 10,000, 10% to compound at an additional 4%? We take that times 1.04. That's 1, 2, 3 years. You're already broken back even. Yet if this is held for a retirement and it's over a 15, 20, 25-year period, that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. This is a 35-year-old. So over 25 years to age 60, that same money is grown into 239. So again, would you give up 10% to compound 4? Absolutely. So if the companies are doing stupid things, I'm going to take the money from that client. I'm going to do right by my client. I'm going to max out the non-commissionable term rider to drop their fees as low as I can. I don't want to make commission on somebody I already made commissions on once. So I'm going to lower that 1035 amount. Yes, they are going to take a loss on the premium load, but again, it's simple interest versus compound interest.
Yeah, like I said, Bryan, dude, I commend you for not capitalizing on that, because most agents, I feel like they well, not most, but I want to say a lot of agents would, right? And so that's one thing I really do appreciate about you. But yeah, I mean, I just have an issue when you have they're incentivized to market. They're incentivized, like if your policy lapse, if you are leveraged and they can pull those levers on you, and they're incentivized to, because it's profit if it lapse, right?
That's the
So
sad part. I heard an executive, and I won't name the company, but I heard an executive laughing about the lapse rates. These insurance companies, whole life, IUL, term, they profit from lapse policies. This is where they're able to subsidize even some of the caps and stuff that they probably shouldn't afford is afforded through lapse policies. So, it sucks. Big insurance companies, they want these lapse policies. So do you think they're doing anything to stop these target funded policies where the fees and cost of insurance erode the cash value? No, because it all adds to their bottom line. The best thing we can do is start teaching agents how to do it the right way instead of the wrong way. Again, I've said this to Chris Kirkpatrick many, many times too. I don't think the issue is necessarily the product, because if you have a competent agent who understands it, it's going to be a decent product. The problem is it's hard to get behind when there is no regulations, when they are incentivizing these things to be done wrong, and 97% of them out there are trash value. How do I rightfully tell somebody that, hey, this is a good product? My biggest fear is people use my knowledge base to say this is a phenomenal product. They go sell it at Target, and now their client gets ripped off in 20, 30 years. You know how hard that is? How do I go out and endorse to tell the world that this is such an amazing product when I know it's going to be misused? It sucks.
yeah, yeah. And so back to the basis of the argument, I'm not saying the product is necessarily the issue. I'm not arguing it's, IU our whole life. I think those are apples and oranges. But as a retirement vehicle, this is what doesn't make sense to me, Bryan. If you go with the IUL, you're gonna have a cost of insurance, right? And so let's say it's a 20% hit up front, or if I think you can even structure it to maybe even just a 10% hit up front, is what you're saying. And then if you go with the S&P, you're going to have a cap. If you don't go with the S&P and you want these proprietary indexes, you're looking at, say, at least 2%, 2.6% in fees, for example, like nationwide. And so you add those fees. And then when you go to take income, you have 5%. So at 65, you take your first income out. And the whole big deal is like, hey, you're not going to pay taxes. Well, if you don't have enough money coming out, your tax rate wasn't going to be very high anyway. Like if it's 50,000, if it's 100,000, your effective tax rate might be under $10,000, right? So it's like, how much money are you actually saving? And then on the flip side, when you take it out of an IUL through policy loans at 5%, well, those are compounding against you the rest of your life, right? You're not putting any new money in
Compounding for
over.
you too.
Brian, over 30 years, if you live to 95, that compound rate would equal 332%.
And what's the compounded rate on the accumulated value? What's the percentage on that? I bet you it's higher than 382. You could take any period in US history and fact check it and run it back. I've tried it through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. As long as you're accumulating more over the of the lifetime of the policy than what you're paying, it's going to be a positive spread.
Well, let's look at the opposite. And I'm not a big 401k fan. In fact, one of my biggest regrets is putting money into a 401k. But let's say you took a brokerage account. You had the full amount available, full amount for investment. If you go with a Vanguard fund, you might be paying 4 to 14 basis points. So very little in fees along the way. And then when you get to retirement, it's a 20% capital gains tax to this long term. You could hedge against the market. You could flip. Number one, just think about that in general, how much more money you're going to have. And if you wanted to put it into an annuity instead of 1035, an IUL, you're going to be in a much better position, Brian. I don't see how you can argue against that.
So you're assuming the capital gains tax are going to stay at 20%. Biden's already trying to raise it to 40. What happens if you lose 40 now? Guess what? Life insurance laws are 100% grandfathered. There's never been a life insurance law that changed that was not grandfathered. So if taxes go up to 40%, capital gains go to 40%, which very likely could happen. We all know, not trying to get political, but the Democrats love to tax the rich. Where's the number one way to tax them? Capital gains tax. So if this increases, you do the math on it, you're just setting yourself up for a future cash trap. Now, if you want to make a valid argument on what would be a good way to basically outperform an IUL, it'd be to take those same mutuals, go to a bank, get a loan to value ratio of more than likely they'll give you 65%. What this means is if you got $1 million in mutual funds, they'll allow you to take a loan up to $650,000 out. Now, if you take a loan of that $650,000, now your $1 million still stays in there tax-free because you never pulled it out. You're taking a loan against it. Now, there's a beautiful thing that's called a step-up in basis, where if you die with this $1 million in mutual funds and you pass it on to your heirs, they take it over tax-free. So if you want to get technical, this will be the best way. The only problem is what happens if these banks run into a financial crisis like Silicon Valley Bank? Now they're going to have a call on that loan for $650,000. If you don't pay the $650,000, they're going to force the sale of your mutuals. Now, when they sell the force of your mutuals, guess what? It becomes a taxable event. So, long story short, you have two levers on that as well. Are we going to get a call on the loan? And then also, are the taxes going to go up? Because in a bad situation, you can run into a huge tax trap in that as well.
So I think what you're doing, Brian, you're just saying, okay, the government has that power, but you're just giving the insurance company that power, right? Because they have the levers too. And you can also maneuver if you know long term.
I can't 1035 out of the government. So I have less control against the government than what I do a life insurance.
In a brokerage account, you could liquidize, dude.
What do you mean?
You could
liquidize
20%. Yeah, it would be 20% long term.
Now,
I'm saying if you found out, okay, taxes are going to go way up, then you could liquidize your money and then find a new investment. Yeah. Right.
I mean, now you're losing 20%. What was the total cost to have the policy?
I mean,
was it less or more than 20%? Depends on
you're losing more than that already through the policy, though. You're taking a 10% hit with all the premiums because you got a cost of insurance, you got your fees, and then you still are putting yourself in a position where you're leveraged and you don't have control. You're dependent on the market performing. And okay, let's say it does, but we're also dependent on the insurance company allowing us to even participate in that market because they can pull the levers and say, hey, we're going to put your cap at 6. And unfortunately,
we talked about this. You got to pick the right company. I mean, you definitely want to look at their track record. We look at somebody like F&G.
60% or 60 condeps score.
Yeah, it's because they've been bought and sold 2-3 times.
Yeah,
I get it. Is the Comdex score important, or is the features of the policy important? We look here. Pass Setter has been out since 2012. That gives us 11-year history. What has their cap rate been? 13.5, 14.75, 15.25, 14. The lowest they've dropped the lever is the current. Right now in 2023, it's actually 12%. So they're the lowest they've been in the last 11 years, and it's warranted. Because what did happen to the interest rate environment? It came down. Now we're starting to go back up. I want to see these caps going back up. If they do, I know that they're following suit. So if we ran the historical rate of return on this, again, I'll bet you more than anything, if you ran this against the actual market, you're averaging over 9%. And that's an 11-year period. It's not like, oh, the past 2 or 3 years. That's 11 full years.
Wait. You're averaging 9% with a 10% cap? Or
No.
What are we talking about?
So if we plot this policy in 2012, you would have earned a 13.5% cap this year, 14.75 the next year, 15.25. You'd be at these cap rates. If you took this and you actually ran it against market history, I don't care which one it is, I'll bet you more than anything it's about a 9% average. So if you were able to earn 9% and borrow it out at a contractual cap of 5%, by the way, because F&G cannot charge more than 5% to borrow the money. That's their contractual cap. They cannot exceed it no matter how high interest rates environment goes. So if you can earn 9 and pay 5, that's a 4% arbitrage, whereas the illustration is only showing 0.5%. So this is why I'm saying, like, these things are good and they do have a good history. So at what point do we just say, oh, the 0.5% is fake because you're not going to get the downturn? What about all those years where we're getting 13.5 and paying 5? What happens when those years when we're getting 14.75 or 10 or even 8? Those are all going to offset those 5s. I mean, I have a personal loan right here, guys. This is my personal policy. I pulled a loan on my son's statement because I wanted to see how it worked. We go here, my information, we pulled out a loan for $1,724. What did we pay in interest that year? Total interest charge. How much? Again, low interest rate environment. This is down 5% because of rising interest rate environments. But that year I paid 2.91. What did I earn? I created a 10% spread that year. So I can afford 2 negative years and still be positive. And this is how these things really work. It's not fabricated, made up numbers. That's a 10% spread. I can withstand a couple negative years and then get the rebound back up. It's about understanding how these things truly work. Now, my cap rate has come down. It is no longer 13.25. It is 12. But still, if I'm getting 12, and if we look at the S&P right now, let's say my policy anniversary was right now. We go to the S&P.
Bryan, I'm not arguing you can't have positive years in the policy. What I'm saying is, and keep in mind, my position is not IUL versus whole life. Like I said,
I know you're saying that there's a risk.
Because I don't think a whole life should be a retirement vehicle either, right? Like it's an insurance policy. It's a tool. It can be part of your portfolio, but I don't think it's like for all these agents going out there and like basically having agents take all their 401k money, all their other investments and say, oh, hey, put it all here. And this is going to be your retirement without a game plan to branch off and maybe even use it as an asset to leverage to go acquire real estate or acquire businesses or acquire even take advantage of the market downturns.
Why not use it for both?
Right. So if I'm going to have it part of my portfolio as a volatility buffer, I'm going to go with the whole life because it's safe money, it's guaranteed, right? And so that's my issue. If you look, you're making the argument like the positive years, but if you went back to, was this, you said 2013, and you got in the S&P, like, dude, do you know how much money you'd have with all your money invested in a 4 basis point Vanguard index? Like it's been skyrocketing. You would have so much more money.
For 20% of it's tax, and then also you got the sequence of returns. You got to realize average returns versus sequence. Every time you're already
giving that up in the insurance costs. You're already giving it up. And then here's the other thing. What if you use the Roth, or what if you use the backdoor Roth, right? Because then you can put this money into a tax-free vehicle and have it in the market and still growing.
And then you lose, you lose your leverage, and now you're subject to market volatility. Again, if the market goes up 50%, if we got 100 grand and the market crashes 50%, we lose 50 grand. But if the market recovers that same 50%, we only gain 25 grand. So on paper, yes, this is a net average of 0%, but does this look like 0%? Now I have a whole thing on sequence of returns. We go in here.
This is if you're not bright enough to say, hey, the market's crashing, this is the economic, and I'm going to stay in the market for the next 2 years while it goes crashing down. like in 2008 to 2009, right?
So
Because it took time to go down. It didn't happen overnight, right? You can pool your money,
it
you can
depends.
make
COVID
other,
happened overnight. In March 2020, the market crashed 60% almost overnight. And then it
and look,
recovered 6% the next year, but people never broke even.
and everybody recovered like instantly
No, they
within
didn't.
a year.
If you lose 66 and gain 66, that's not zero. That's not how sequence of returns works. If we look here,
Bryan, go look at a chart, the S&P.
I have one right here, 1928.
Pull it
Go
up,
back and look at it
please.
right here. All the way back to
From
1928. You take the average of the S&P, it works to
no,
754.
a chart from the last 10 years.
So
Not
there's
a chart, like an actual chart where you can see, okay, we're higher.
you can see 12, 13, 29, 11, 9, 19, 28, 16, 16. I mean, my point though is you're saying that the market did so well, but you're not taking into effect sequence of returns. For example, if we take the S&P, you got a 7.84 average, right? And I see this with prime America agents all the time when they say buy term and invest the rest. What they're saying is they run it through the investor.gov calculator. They say, hey, if you got 10 grand, you're going to average 7.84. We look at this every year. We compound 7.8.4. By 2021, our 10 grand will grow into 12 million, correct? That's average rate of return. And then we look at sequence of returns. Yet if you actually put in 10 grand, first year in 1928, the market went up 37%. We gained 37%. But then all of a sudden it goes negative. Now let's count the years. We lose our money. We put 10 grand in. We're now down to 86. How many years does it take to break even? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. So 21 years is what it took to break even. It's important to understand sequence of returns. We look here. You're telling your clients, hey, you're going to get 7.84. You project out.
Bryan, go back down. I want you to show, this is my exact point. If you look at 2029, negative, 2030, negative,
1929. Yep.
negative. And that's my whole point is it was a 4-year period for it to reach the bottom. So for it to take that long, you would have had to just be dumb and stay in the market for 4 years.
And how many people
you would have not hedged against it with insurance on your
So what you're doing is you're telling your retirement clients, hey, stop doing your day job and focus on your retirement because they got time to watch the market 24/7. That's what you're saying. I mean, didn't you say earlier that 96% of people will never outperform the S&P? So if they start taking it out, putting it in, taking it out, putting it in, doesn't 96% of them not going to keep up the S&P? I'm lost on what you're saying now.
I mean, you could buy a put option and just protect the money, dude. You can have it actively managed. You can do different things. Obviously,
and now let's go talk to the average client and ask them if they know what puts and options are. You know who teaches them? People that want to sell them products. I mean, I get your point. I get your thing. And if people really wanted to do it, they could go buy Tesla stocks. They could go buy friggin' Amazon. You know what I mean? Yes, it's hindsight. But how many people missed it? I know for a fact that I hear the sob story from any client that's about 65. They say, oh, yeah, well, 2008 tripled me. Let's look here. In 2008, what happened to your money? On a variable compounded market, you went from 831 to 511.
Do me a favor, Bryan. Go back down to the beginning. Variable compounded index. So here's the other issue. You're showing these numbers, but you started with 10,000 in each. Like you didn't account for the cost of insurance. Because remember, you're taking a hit.
We can absolutely factor that in. We can absolutely factor that in. This was just the difference between a variable account versus an indexed account. You're right. But also, I did not factor in any fees here either. So there's no fees in whatever mutual fund or 401k managed plan or whatever. So there's no fees in either one. It's just to show the strategy of indexing versus compounding.
And what cap is that index, by the way?
That is a 12% cap.
12%. Okay. So right now, a lot of companies are at 10. I know there's some at 12, but that's another thing you have to pay attention to, right? And like I said, the older.
And I just showed they've held over 12% for 11 years in a row now. So they have a decent track record to show it too. Again, it is very important to understand how these companies work, what company you're going with, where are their levers. Now, F&G, they have one of the highest premium loads. They're not the best company. They charge a 9% premium load, whereas most companies are 5 to 7%. So they are subsidizing with the fees. They're offering a higher cap, but they're charging more fees to do so. So I fully understand that. But I guarantee if I ran this with cost of insurance and fees, it would still outperform the variable market. And it's because this is what advisors are doing. Primary market does it all the time. I see them all the time. They go in, they say, oh, look, if you average 7.84, this is what it'll look like. And they go to investor.gov, and what does that curve do? Go straight up. They never show the sequence of returns. But I am running out of time, Michael. Sorry.
No worries, dude. I think we covered pretty much we covered a lot, right? So I think the main thing is there's a lot of components to this, the IUL that most people miss. Or most people don't even know are there. They don't know there's fees embedded in the indexes. They don't know how much it's actually going to cost. And like you said, you see policies that they're just sold like they're all magic, they're all going to work. And it's a big issue in the industry. And I know we're on the same page as far as that goes, Bryan.
Well, the worst part is when you hear somebody say, oh, it's just going to be properly funded and structured, and then you kindly ask them to open up their book of business. By all means, redact everything in your client's portfolio, but send me a policy where you did the right thing. And they say, well, I'm not going to send that. It's because they haven't done it. They say the keywords, the buzzwords of properly funded and properly structured, but they have no history of doing it, and they don't even understand it. That's the biggest problem.
Yeah. I'll make my closing argument, and I'll let you make yours, Bryan. That way we can wrap this up. But considering all the levers, considering the cost of insurance, I think Robert Kiyosaki talked about investments are risky, right? Unless you have control. And he talks about business and real estate being always better than paper assets, simply because with real estate, right, you can force positive arbitrage. You can force appreciation. You can cash flow it. So even if the market goes down, who cares? I'm still making money every month. And so there's definitely some benefits there. And I understand what he's saying, but what he's saying is you have to have control. And when you start to look at, okay, the insurance company has control of the cap rates. They have control of the cost of insurance. They have control of the loan rates. I know there are some maximums in there, obviously, with all these things, but they do have these levers that they can pull. And so it's kind of like, trust me, we're in control, right? And here's the thing, they make money. Like you're trusting the people that are going to make money if your policy did lapse. Right. And so to me, they're contractually putting the risk back on you. And I'm just not okay with my whole retirement. And I'm not saying, obviously like I said, I'm prone of whole life. There are some guarantees there, but I just can't see why you would put your whole retirement in something you have so little control of. I know you can 1035 out, but if that's the best way out, then it kind of makes the case against IUL, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, in a whole life, you do have a guaranteed loss on opportunity costs. So, I mean, it is what it is. I haven't seen
not if you're 90% liquid, right?
I haven't seen a whole life
liquid.
I haven't seen a whole life get 151% in a single year. I haven't seen a whole life get 61% in a single year, but I have seen that in an IUL. So, you know what I mean? I've seen average rates of return over a 10-year policy averaging over 9% in IUL. I've seen them average over 12% on a 12-year-old policy, but I haven't seen that in a whole life. So there is an opportunity cost to have those guarantees, and people got to understand that. It's the same thing if you go into bonds versus stocks. You got more risk, more reward. So there's opportunity cost to everything. That's why they always suggest that you take a certain amount of your portfolio and you put it into guaranteed stuff, and then you put it into whatchamacallit. As you get older, those risks should change.
Right. But I think that's my argument is it should not be your retirement vehicle. It can be part of a portfolio. Like I said, if you're going to make it your safe money, I definitely put it with a whole life, but it shouldn't be your retirement vehicle. And that's the argument. And it's being sold, Bryan, it's being sold like it's this retirement vehicle, and put all your money here. This is all you need. You can put so little and you can get so much out of this, because look at the illustration. And it always shows positive arbitrage every single year. And it's just not the case, right? Like life's not done on a spreadsheet.
But you point out the fact that it only shows a 0.5% of arbitrage every single year, never shows a downturn. But I'm gonna argue the counterpoint. What about all those years where you get 13.25 and you only pay 3? What about those? How come it doesn't show that?
Here's
So
the
it's not
problem.
paying
You
back
take
either.
a 20% hit one year, right? You're not going to make it up the next year with the cap. Like you can't make it up with a 10% cap. It's going to take time to make it up. So you're going to count on not just one positive year, but multiple positive years while
That's the
this
market.
is compounding against you
Seven up,
because
three down.
you're injecting more costs, right? You're injecting more loan costs, and you got to make this up, right? So
But if
that's
they're
the issue.
three down, you're
You're
going to
so
make it up. That's my
leveraged,
point.
and like I said, my closing argument comes down to lack of control, right? You're giving the insurance company like you don't control the market, you don't control the cap rates, you don't control any of this stuff, you don't control the option costs either, right? Because there's another variable that goes into this, and so your only control is the 1035 and
That's
get
a lot.
out of it, right? So, and not saying that's not, I'm not saying that's not a good thing to do or anything, but it might be the thing you need to do. And it is an option. But I just say when you think about investments and you think about what makes an investment risky or not risky is the lack of control, right? And you don't control any of these levers. Like I said, you become dependent on the market, which I actually believe in the market because I think we're, the prime Americans will try to scare you and tell you, oh, look at the guarantees, 30 years of zero, right? And your policy lapse. Well, it's kind of silly because they're talking out of both sides of their mouth because they're going to go
Obviously,
and
there's
try
some
to put them in the
ones that would
market
be affected by the
that they
same
just
S&P.
that they
Yeah.
just dissed, right? They just said it's going to go down for 30 years. Let me put you there. Why would you do that? So that's definitely not the argument. But what I'm trying to say is you have all these factors that you're not in control of. And I do believe in the market, but then you're also trusting the insurance company to allow you to participate in that market, right?
But
Because they control those
whole life has
levers.
leverage too, though, Michael. Do they have a loan cap provision on the whole lives?
Whole life isn't even, this isn't even the argument. I
I
would argue
understand that,
a whole life shouldn't be retirement either. That's
but my point is
an
you're making
insurance policy,
negative
any
spread,
insurance policy should not be your retirement, right?
but you
That's the
keep saying
argument here.
you keep
And the
saying whole
argument,
life has the lever or it has the guarantees, but they don't have a guarantee on
I
the loan.
said, as part of your portfolio as a volatility buffer, if you have a small portion that's safe money, but no, whole life shouldn't be your retirement vehicle. It could be a foundation, it could be a piece. You should and I think you even just said it, you should have a portfolio, right? And I think when you get to retirement, you're going to want to take money out of other places where it's not so highly leveraged,
Why?
right? You're going to want other places.
Why wouldn't I borrow my money at 10% and pay 5? I mean, it's like a home equity line of credit.
If you get 10 at current cap rates, are you going to always get 10? No.
I mean, they're averaging 8%.
Are you
right
going to
now.
have negative years and go backwards? Are you going to have the same sequence of returns issue when you take a 20% loss and you have a 10% cap? That's the issue, right? And if you take a couple of those in a row, you're in a big, like the cap is the trap. And you're going to become dependent on uncapped options to hopefully catch you up.
But where is this 20% that you're referring to? Because let's look at an actual sample.
I just showed you.
Yeah, you twisted the numbers to fit your narrative. Let's look at this.
To do it earlier, but what happens, Brian, is there's more and more and more and more compound at 5% against you. You continue to take money out. Eventually, if it doesn't happen at 70, it happened at 70 because I did push the numbers, but it'll happen at 75.
Where's the 20%? At 68 years old, your total cost of insurance is $120 plus 163. Your cash accumulation is 239,000. So where's the 20% opportunity cost?
Where's the loans?
If you're taking out a loan, you're still compounding on the full amount. So even if you have a couple negative years, it's going to be bounced back as soon as you come back up.
You're not showing the loan cost, Brian. That's the biggest cost of the policy in retirement. You're taking loans constantly every year as income.
The point,
it's compounding at 5%. Before you know it, like you're paying just as much for the loan cost as you are that you're receiving money. Right.
If we go here, we look at the market. We'll use F&G for example. We look here. Average right now with their S&P 12.5% cap, the 20-year average is 8.31. So if we're averaging 8.31 and we have a contractual guarantee of a 5% loan, Where is this? You say that it's a shame that they always show a positive arbitrage. I say it's a shame that they only show half a point. Because if we're going off of here, off a 20-year look back, you're averaging 8.31 and paying 5. That's a positive spread of 3.31. I should be able to show that because that's a little bit more realistic than half a point. So you argue one point, I argue the other side, yet the math leans more with what I'm showing than what you're showing.
Like I said, my final argument is about control of your investments. And you are capped. You do lack control. The insurance company is in control of your investment. They can change it.
You're somewhat
they
but that
can
depends
lower
on
the cap
company.
rates. You even told me, Bryan, F&G, you're showing F&G, and you even told me earlier the older policies are at 6%.
Absolutely. 1035.
And that's these levers. That's these levers I'm talking about, Bryan. And if it's 5 years, you're still under surrender period. So you know how you can only change every 10 years. So if you do fall into this trap,
if you have a $2,000 surrender penalty and you can get 10%, again, would you give up 10 to compound at 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever? I would give up a surrender in a heartbeat if I could go up 5%, 6%. It's basic math. And then there's also
that just hurts, but that hurts your case, Bryan, because you're constantly changing policies and you're giving up 10% all the time now.
But it's simple interest versus compound interest. I'm willing to do that. If I got to set myself back 3 years to not shoot myself in the foot in 25, I'm going to do it all day long. And again, how many times is that going to happen? I just showed you their track record for the last 12 years. So for 12 years, I didn't have to 1035. If I have to 1035 in the 13th year, then I'm past my surrender. That's not a big deal. That's why track record is important. And there are uncapped strategies too. Again, you look here, this uncapped one right here is in the S&P. This is not a low volatility index. There is a 10% spread. However, if the market was to recover, just like 2005, or I'm sorry, 2021 when COVID happened, this is a real actual return. Let me share it. This is real. This is not some fabricated, this is an actual statement. This client was in the uncapped 1-year no cap index in March 15th. The market rebounded 66%. His spread rate was 5% at the time. He had 872,000. His cost of insurance fees were 20 grand. So after they deducted the cost of insurance and fees, he had 852. That compounded at 61.33. He got credited $535,000 tax-free all in 1 year. His cash value went from 872,000 to almost $1.4 million. Guess what? He can afford 2, 3, 4 negative years and still be boasting a really good average. Matter of fact, he can have 10 negative years and still average 6%, which is more than the 5% loan. That's my point.
Right. And what's going to happen, Bryan? Because number one, you're taking a 1 year snapshot, right? Are you going to bank on 61% happening every? Like, is it going to happen? Can it happen? Sure. But is it going to happen all the time? Is it going to happen every policy? No. And even if it does happen during the accumulation phase, Bryan, what happens is you got to think about people's psychology. Okay, I have this money, I can retire now. So guess what? Now you're starting the compounding earlier because now they retire, they're starting to take their loans out.
But the
they may never get that
man.
again.
That's what you're not seeing. If the accumulated value compounds and the loan compounds, it's not a big deal at all.
All right. I think you just have to, and like I said, the winner here is everybody who attended. I don't know if you want to make a final argument, Bryan. I know mine was about lack of control and being too highly leveraged. If you want to make a final argument.
Yeah, I mean, my only argument is the fact that, yes, they have control, but you got to look at the track record. Just because they have it doesn't mean they're going to use it. Our government has way bigger guns than us. If they wanted to turn around and obliterate the U.S., they could easily do it. But are they going to do it? It's the same thing with the insurance. You got to look at the track record. Have they done it? Will they do it? Just because it's there doesn't mean they have. You look at somebody like Nationwide, they have a 4%. They can drop their caps all the way down to 4%. But have they ever done it? During the lowest interest rate environment ever, their cap stayed steady at 8%. And guess what? When you're getting bonds that are coupon and rating out at 2, 3%, I understand it. So as long as they're following the economic principles of what's going on in the economy, I don't have a problem with it.
I mean, they can raise their loan rate to 8% and you have an 8% cap. That would be, once again, that would be trouble, right? So
absolutely.
But yeah, I appreciate you, Bryan. Like I said, dude, I have a lot of respect for you because not every agent does their homework the way you do, and not
And there
every
was
agent is.
questions. I just wanted to address the questions in the comment
Yeah,
section too.
for sure.
First one, and then we'll wrap it up. First one was, I joined late. Are we able to ask questions? Oh, we should have probably read that earlier. Questions are now. Did I hear Michael say agents are illustrating policies at 11%? How's that happening? So they're not showing illustrations, but they're showing like off the illustration, like, look, this is average 11%. So they're not able to show it compounding at 11%, but they're using the terminology. Oh, well, look, this one's averaged 14%. Shady. Don't like it. Wish they would get rid of it. They should never
And
have
I'll
it.
and I'll admit something. I was that agent when I first got started because I just believed the illustration, and it wasn't because I had ill intent. Because obviously, since I've learned, I said, okay, that's wrong. I'm changing my ways. But yeah, I was that agent. I saw, oh, look, this actually earns 12% and it's only showing you 6. So think about imagine the other 6% that you would have compounding, how much more that would be,
Yeah, I agree.
right?
I
And that's
agree.
an issue.
I hate it. I hate it. So what can they drop the participation rate to? It depends on the company. Each company will have their contractual guarantees. Again, anybody selling any product, whole life term, IUL, don't care. Read the freaking illustration. You'll see everything. All the levers are in there. Read the illustration, read the contract. I promise you it won't disappoint you. So just check whatever product you're doing. You'll find that out, whoever AZ is. Who illustrates the FIA at 30%? I mean, I think he was just exaggerating a little bit, but some of them do get a little ridiculous with the way they illustrate, especially like Silac that were illustrating like, no joke, like 13% or something ridiculous.
Yeah, the 30%, by the way, was fixed index annuities because AG49, AG49A, AG49B, it only regulates IUL. It doesn't regulate the annuity. So there's no regulation on the annuities, and they don't have to look as far back as IUL. They only have to look 20 years back, and they say this is the best 10 years, this is the worst 10 years, and this is the last 10 years, right? And so when they create these proprietary indexes, of course, they can pick the winners after the fact, so they know how to make the illustration look really good.
Agreed.
And unfortunately, there's no regulation. So these companies are showing 20, 24% max illustrated rate, even 32%. I think it was a theme. Silac is at 24%. And the reality is they're never going to perform at that. It's going to be a big disappointment for your client. In fact, I would say if you understand the proprietary indexes, I don't sell annuities with a illustration. We say, hey, these are the index strategies. These are what's performed. Obviously, the S&P performs better than these proprietary indexes. And so, okay, what has the best cap? Like I like security benefit, has a 12% cap. The problem is people are looking at these uncapped options like they're going to perform, and it's a fake history. It's all inflated. It's bogus.
I agree with you. How are you able to show? Okay, so never mind. He corrected that. Scratch that. I was looking at the wrong column, so he's got that one. I prefer not to show income if possible. Just what in terms of the cash value can do exactly. They can do it because it's competitive. Market the money. I think he was referring to the 1035. No one can time the market. It's pretty accurate. I think someone on YouTube. Yeah, Chris Kirkpatrick is offering $1,000 bounty for anybody that can find a policy older than 10 years. The problem is 98% of all, 92% of all insurance agents fail out within the first year. And then out of that 8% that are left, how many are doing it right? Somebody like me, I know IUL inside and out. I can't qualify for this because I don't have a client that's older than 10 years. My oldest policy written properly is 4 years old. So he excluded so many people. You also got to have the original illustration as well as enforce one. So back 10 years ago, everything was done by paper. It wasn't just as simple as pulling up a digital copy. So good luck. You got to go through your file storage and go find those. So very few people are going to qualify for that. I know for a fact a company that has it, they just don't want to do it. I wish they would. I've tried to talk them into it, but they're just not wanting to get into it. So hopefully
Here's the
one of these
other
days.
here's the other issue with that, Bryan. How many and trust me, I like that challenge because it's hard to find, right?
I told
And
Chris, show me one
proves the
single
point.
whole life that has done the same, that has outperformed its original illustration. It's called decreasing rate environment. It's not going to happen, period. Same thing, dividends came down in the last 10 years too. So it's kind of like, I hate the fact that he puts out the challenge, but then he doesn't have a whole life where he can say, look, we outperformed our dividends because they came down. Because again, it has to do with interest rate environments. But that's me and Chris. I'll eventually get that debate too. We're going to be hopefully Q1. So show what it has done with the illustrated at. Yeah, I mean, really, you should stick with the illustration because if you get into too much, I hate the illustration. I kill the illustration from day one, by the way, Kasim. I always tell people, listen, man, this is fabricated. It says it's going to earn at a 6.28% interest rate. You're going to have 0 years. Hopefully you get those 61% years. But if you average 6.28, this is what it's going to look like in between. So you can sell off the illustration. I personally could drop the illustration rate down to 5% and still sell the policy because they go so in depth with how they actually work. Yes, I should do it, but I can't. I need to go to my office and go through the file storages. I'm eventually going to do it. I just got to make my way out there. It's clear across the United States. But when I go out there, I'm going to find one. Michael, you just mentioned how you make up 20% loss with the cap, but in those years, IUL won't lose the 20% or receive the floor like the zero. He's referring to the loan. And Michael, I'll let you talk on this one because that was kind of your thing. But when he's talking about the loan, he's talking about the cost of the loan being 20%, but he's not really talking about the accumulation value on the accumulated value either. He's literally just saying the cost of the loan plus the cost of insurance. So it's a little skewed to make it
the
a little bit stronger.
The thing that you got to consider is, there's no market risk, right? You're not going to lose money because of the market, but there are costs, right? And so during the accumulation phase, anytime you get a zero, by the way, you guys you lose, right? You don't stay level, you actually go negative because of the cost. Now, during the accumulation phase, you're not going to see that because you're constantly putting new money in.
But you don't. But here's the thing, Michael, you don't lose because it's a ledger, not a loss. Your accumulated value does not come down. They don't physically take you from 1.3 down to what did you say, 20%? So that would take us down 260,000. So you don't go from 1.3 to 1 million. There is no compounded loss. Your cash value would stay the same at 1.3 the following year. Your surrender value would take a loss, but that's going to be recovered as soon as that following year, that 1.3 earns at 10%, you're going to earn 130,000. So you don't lose 20%. It's accumulated value versus surrender value. So it's not a loss. It's a compounded effect.
Right. So in a policy or in a game where the goal is to avoid zero, because that's game over. If you have, say, 250,000, but you've been earning these compound interests. Let's say you're at 1.5 million, and there's a 5% loan rate. Let's say the policy is done really great. You have 1.5 million leveraged out on loan, right? That's compounding at 5% against you. So if you take the 5%, that's $75,000. So if you have a 250 surrender value, and now you just lost $75,000 because you didn't get the interest credit. That's what I'm referring to. You could take a massive hit. You'd be down to what, 175.
And then what happens the next year when it rebounds? Now you just earned 150,000. Therefore, your surrender value went back up. That's my point. So there's a recovery phase after every drop.
Right. If you get like a max credit, every time you get less than 5.5%, but think about it, your loans are 5%, and then you have a little bit of cost of insurance. So anytime you get less than 5.5% in retirement, you're losing. That's why I say you become dependent on that 5.5% gain every year. Now, some years it's going to be there, and some years it's not, right? And that's the thing you have to understand. But you do have to earn that 5.5%, or you will be losing every year that you don't. Does that make sense?
Somewhat, because again, the accumulated value doesn't get affected. Now, if it drew from the accumulated value, I would agree with you all day, Michael. I would say, oh, that sucks, because now you're only compounded at 1.1, not 1.3. But again, you're not interrupting the compounding growth. So it literally will offset. But we'll move on to the next one. 1035 is Bryan's strategy. Yes, 1035 is the only leverage you got. So, I mean, if it's the only strategy you got to be able to use it. Now, how many times are we going to have to 1035? Probably not that often. Again, I want to look at where the policy's at, what was the economic situation, and where are they now. If I find out that they're robbing Peter to pay Paul, yes, I would want a 1035. If I find out, hey, you know what, the timing that I got my policy was just in the same time frame that bonds were, super low, I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to wait it out another 5 years and see if when bonds come back up, are they going to restore my cap? If so, there's no point in 1035. So 1035 is the last ditch strategy, not the strategy.
My question, when you look at Securian and F&G and even Nationwide to an extent, right? They raised caps on all policies, but they only gave smaller raises to the older book, and they gave a bigger raise to the accumulator. So when you look at what these companies are doing, how many companies do you know that are not robbing Peter to pay Paul?
How many are not robbing Peter to pay Paul?
Right.
Probably a majority of the major ones. Pack Life, I know, isn't. Nationwide's done a really good job of not doing it. A lot of the bigger ones, it's all the newer companies that are trying to spread that book of business. And again, I don't think they're monsters for doing it because it makes sense. The older money's not earning, the newer money is earning. So I understand why they're splitting up the pool. I'm not mad. I just think there's got to be a little bit of loyalty to your old policyholders. You should use the new money, but then they can't advertise a 14% cap or 12% cap if they're subsidizing the old policy. So it's kind of a
Right.
double-edged sword. I can see where they're at.
And I
Makes it
think
hard.
that's the issue is they're incentivized to use it towards marketing versus helping the older book.
Yeah. And I can see that. I mean, it is what it is. They're all marketing freaking conglomerates and stuff. But next question is, doesn't the cost of insurance increase when you start a new policy 3 years later? What happens if the client is now table rated? If the client's table rated is not a big deal. For those of you guys that don't, that are kind of maybe newer to cash value life insurance, the way the IRS sets it up is the older you are, the less insurance you're required. So if you got $100,000, you're throwing it into a policy, a 20-year-old may be required to have a $600,000 death benefit versus a 70-year-old may only be required to have $120,000 of death benefit. So they keep the cost relatively the same. It's not always the case, but for the most part, that's how they adjust it. So if they are table rated, it's fine.
Yeah, I'd say this too. The cost isn't going to change too much just because remember you're on an annual renewable term. So your cost is based on your age anyway in your current policy. So that's one thing I would say.
And then as time goes on, that corridor shrinks too. So the IRS actually allows you to buy less and less life insurance as you get older to offset the rising cost too. So it kind of washes out. Can you use IUL for IBC? I mean, we can have a whole nother discussion on this. We're trying to get off, so I'm not going to go through it. IBC is a concept, not a product. Anytime where you're earning interest in anytime you're earning interest on your full amount and you're paying interest and you make that payment back to yourself, that's the concept of IBC. So if you guys are going to pull the cash value life insurance from any policy, IUL or whole life, you use it to buy a car, you take the same car payment you're going to pay and you make it back to yourself. You can use IUL, you can use whole life. Again, we can have another discussion on that. We'll move on. Round one, fight. Thanks, good info. Yeah, that was. Where can we find renewal history of these top carriers? It's hard. I got to call in multiple times, get the right agent. A lot of these call centers, guys, they're not agents and they don't understand this crap at all. So it's really hard to find the renewal history, their cap integrity and stuff like that. If you guys have a regional rep, I highly recommend to sort it out with them because they have the resources to be able to get it. That's how I got the F&G one. I got a hold of my regional rep and said, hey, man, I love these products. I'm teaching on them. Please, for me to have faith in your company and to back you guys up, I need to see what your guys' history is because the older policies I've seen of you guys, it's not a good history. So please help me clean this up. And then that's when they sent that to me. To Michael.
Yeah.
On a market downturn, if we can predict and get out of the market, why can't a client switch wash loan and avoid load in a compound? I mean, that's a good question, but again, we're trying to get off the call. That's going to be a long-winded.
Let me ask you, Bryan. Can you switch the loan mid-loan once you've already taken? You can't. Okay.
Yep, you can switch every year.
So when I sold IUL heavily, I had a progression where
let me just put an excerpt in there. I should say it depends on the company. I do know one company that will not allow you to switch the loan until it's paid off. So majority of the companies are going to allow you to switch in between the two. All they do is just reverse the ledger. You go from a 3-number ledger to a 2-number ledger from index versus versus fixed. But sorry, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, this is where Bryan I have two. We just have different outlooks here. But when I sold IUL heavily and I started learning, like, okay, this gotta watch out for this risk and that risk, and this is how this works. And one of the things I started doing was I started telling people, like, in retirement, if you are going to leverage this policy, do it with, and don't leverage it. Just take the wash loan because it does give you equal credit. So you're not going to have that 0 year. You're always going to get an equal credit to what you borrowed, what they're charging you. And so the only thing that doesn't get covered is the your cost of insurance, right? The per 1,000. But it's obviously if you reduce the net risk, it's going to be minimal. So to me, it's a much safer option.
Yeah, I can see that. David McKnight argues the same thing. I'm the type of person where I'm not going to say, hey, you need to go variable because of this. Alternate has this place, variable has this place. You're going to have a little bit more people that are willing to inject a little bit more risk than others. So one's not right, one's not wrong. I'm a big advocate of both. I prefer variable myself.
Yeah. And I guess I'm just a little less risk adverse.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's how you guys are going to be with your clients too. You guys are going to have clients that are more risk adverse than others, and you're going to have some that are not. I still sell whole life, guys. I'm not IUL only. I'm not telling my clients, hey, you got to go IUL. I usually ask them, what's your risk assessment? Here's how cash value life insurance works. Would you prefer guarantees? And do you want more death benefit? Because if a client comes to me and they say they want death benefit permanent life insurance, I'm not selling IUL, guys. IUL is not meant for life insurance, period. I don't care what anybody says. Like Michael said, there's too many levers when your cost of insurance is that high. Expense fees, all that good stuff. I'm going to use a GUL or a whole life. But yep, we can wrap it up. All right, Michael, thank you so much for asking me, buddy. I look forward to a couple more of these. We went on for about an hour and 46 minutes, and I feel like we could be talking for another hour and 30, but I really do got to get going. It's pretty late here. It's 8:46, and I got to put the kids down.
No worries, Brian. No, I appreciate you taking the time. And like I said, I think the winners is the people that get this information. Absolutely. And now they can make an a more informed decision for themselves, because they probably got information that their uplines didn't tell them, or maybe some of their agents didn't tell them. And there's obviously a lot more to this product, and I think there's a reason you say I like it and I hate it. So but no, I think that's the real win. And what I like to do is bring this awareness to the industry, because like we both mentioned is people are selling this and they have no clue what they're selling at all.
That's the absolute scariest part.
Yeah.
Trash my insurance seems way too true with that.
Exactly. All right, guys. So
take it easy. See you guys.
All right, guys.
All right, bye.
Have a good one.